today. So Vatish, Dr. Lalgudi, Vatish Lalgudi will be talking to us about corneal cylinder. Now it sounds interesting, and I think we all know what a toric lens is and what corneal astigmatism is, but I think that Dr. Vatish is going to take us to another level now. And so we're going to question perhaps some of the things that we know and really try to get down to how we look at cylinder for refractive purposes. So as many of you know, Vatish is our fellow, but he's always been teaching us a lot of things. And so we look forward to another hour of you teaching us stuff, Vatish. So go ahead, please let us know a bit more about corneal cylinder.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Dr. Baig. And it's been really stimulating working here, and I'm learning a lot. And I'm really happy to share my thoughts here, and I welcome your comments and the panelists and the other attendees' comments too, and it'll be interesting to know that. And so, can you see the presentation now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. So today we are going to be discussing a talk which is, I usually take talks from known to unknown so that we can connect the dots in the brain gradually and build a concept. But this is a specific talk which does not have a great flow as such, but we will be covering anywhere there is a doubt, we'll be covering it at another part in the same presentation, and we'll try and have a good thought process into the talk as we go in. So this is about origin of cylinders in complex refractive surgeries. So this is, I do not have any financial disclosures in this talk. And before we start, so this talk came out or emanated from the idea that, a lot of times when we plan a correction on a patient for a cylinder, whatever correction we have on the cornea and whatever the patient has on refraction, they do not match. And there's a huge debate since several years which is going on how to treat, which one to treat. And the main challenge for a refractive surgeon has been, since a long time, has been how to treat cylinders on the cornea. So these red and blue lines which I'm using here are not just to make an animation look good, but for people to also understand that these represent the meridians of the cornea. And within these meridians, the upper half of the red line, which is bisected by the blue, and the lower half of the red, each of these are called hemimeridians, which basically are two halves of a meridian. So this we will be alluding to in different portions of the talk, so that I'm introducing that right away here. So when we look at the problem with the cylinder, so just like how they ask what's in a name, the cylinder has been long misused and used in the right and wrong ways since several years. And so asking what's in a cylinder and what magnitude and axis to treat and what happens long term is an important question that we'll address here. And when we look at, say, common devices from which we derive the cylinders or the K values, as in what normally happens is the K1 and K2 are your the steep and the flat meridian, the powers of the steep and the flat meridian. And what you have is the difference of K1 and K2 is your cylinder, or what is commonly called astigmatism. And this is what everybody knows, and we have been using these systems to kind of calculate our toric IOLs or toric ICLs or topo-guided corneal ablation platforms and other platforms on excimer laser correction. But there is a lot more to look at these rather than just what K1 and K2 can show us and what these cylinders would mean. So we would try and get a closer picture as to how we look through a lens and try and get a better clarity, and also introduce towards the end a concept called 3Z as to understanding the cylinders that we see in refraction. So we'll touch upon this towards the end. So this image which I show here is a common image which I usually use to explain people that this K1 and K2 that we see as the steep and the flat meridian powers are actually average powers of, so if you look at K1, it is an average of keratometric dioptric powers in the steep meridian at the 3 mm zone. So 1 point superiorly and 1 point inferiorly. So having a K1 and K2 which is normal, as in say this image on the left and the image on the right, both of them have a similar K1 and K2, and the astigmatism as a difference of these is also similar. But if you look at these two corneas, it is something that would strike every ophthalmologist. So basically what is here is the K1 in the left image is an average of say 44 and 44.2, which gives an average as 44.1. Whereas in the right image, the K1 is an average of larger differences. As in if you look at these two upper halves of the same meridian, if the values are similar, then you have the difference between these two meridian would be called an astigmatism or a second order astigmatism or a cylinder in common. But if there is a difference between the same meridian, as in if you have a difference superiorly versus inferiorly between the same red line points in the 3 millimeter zone, it is not entirely astigmatism, and there is a component of hidden aberration which is commonly called as coma. And if this, I explained to you that a normal looking K1 average of say the steep and the flat, the superior and the inferior parts of the same meridian could be say 43.5, but those values could be as close as say 43 and 44 superiorly and inferiorly, which could be a normal scenario, and they could be as varying as 39 and 48, which is actually a difference of 9 diopters. And this also would give you a similar keratometric power of 43.5. And the cylinder is not just the difference between these. We should not just look at it as a difference between these two, but also look at the individual components of the two hemimeridians to be able to have a better understanding of what your cylinder is showing. And the next example here that I would also bring up before we delve into the deeper concepts of cylinder is, if you look at this picture closely, at every zone, say the 3 millimeter, 4 or the 5 millimeter zone, the axis and the amount of astigmatism is slightly different. Though it is not very different, but if you look at say between the 3 millimeter zone here and the 5 millimeter zone here, the major axis itself is varying by around 10 to 20 degree. So this interzonal variation can also be, the interzonal variation is not a component of a cylinder. It is a component of a spherical aberration or trefoil. So if you look at this image, this is something that you would have commonly seen as an EKR map. So if the amount of cylinder and the axis of cylinder varies between the different pupillary zones, that has to be considered before we label a patient as having a regular or irregular cylinder. And if you look at these values are varying from say at 1 millimeter zone, the K1 minus K2 is 0.49, whereas at the 5 millimeter zone, it is around 3 diopters. So this cornea, though if you look at just the K1 and K2 values, they may look like say 39 and 42, and the astigmatism will be 2 diopters, but it is not something that you just have to look at the numbers and say this is a normal astigmatism, this is a lesser amount of astigmatism. It's about the amount of irregularity that is there in the cornea that is important both between the two hemimeridians and between the different zones. So these are two important things to know before we go in. And so, to be able to understand what cylinder outcomes are and how to understand cylinders, we need to understand what a topo-guided treatment basically does and how it is different from a wavefront optimized ablation profile. So if you look at this image, this is a 2D eye which I keep using in all my slides. And if you look at this, for example, this topography with a patient with a diffraction of -3 diopter sphere and -2 diopter cylinder, I'm used to using the negatives version of the cylinder, and I'm not going to actually, it's not going to make a difference as such whether you use a positive or negative here. I'm trying to drive a concept, and I'm sure it will be taken easily. And if you look at this patient, the bottom figure, the bar shows that the refraction, the cylinder that we measure is -2, and the measured cylinder on the topography is -1.94, and the axes also match. So this is a scenario which is easy. And if you look at the corneal aberrations of this patient, it is predominantly astigmatism, and the other aberrations are very minimal, though they are there. And if you look at a wavefront optimized ablation pattern for this patient, and if you treat them with this ablation pattern, you will get a perfect outcome of say 2015 or 2016. And whereas if you look at a similar patient with a similar astigmatism and a similar amount of sphere, but on this patient again, the refraction cylinder and the measured cylinder on the topographer are different. And if you look at what constitutes that, it is basically that only a part of the actual cylinder that is there on the cornea is that you see on the cornea as astigmatism on the topography, and the remaining part is say contributed by others like trefoil, coma. And in this scenario, if you do just a normal wavefront optimized ablation, it would ablate say 92 microns of your cornea on a LASIK treatment. And what would happen is your outcome would be, though your amount of cylinder that you have at the end of the treatment is minimal, say 0.5 diopter of cylinder, but the outcome is blurry because the patient has aberrations in his cornea. And if you look at the actual aberrations, actual component of this 0.5 diopter of cylinder that is there, it is predominantly coma which is left in his cornea. So the residual cylinder is predominantly coma, so the patient will definitely have a blurry image. And to treat that appropriately, what your topo-guided treatment platforms do is that they initially find out the difference between the aberrations of a normal cornea and the cornea that your patient currently has. And say the cornea has astigmatism and coma, and it initially treats the actual coma or the other higher order aberrations on the cornea, even when you don't actually feed in a refraction value. So even for a zero diopter cylinder and zero diopter sphere and cylinder ablation, if you feed in this image into any kind of a topo-guided treatment platform, be it say the MEL90 or the EX500 or the Schwind Amaris, so they would create a profile which is the difference between the aberrations of a normal cornea and that of your aberrated cornea, and you would treat around say 10 to 12 microns of cornea just to regularize the aberrations. And on top of that, you would treat your sphere and the cylinder. So instead of 92 microns, the same cornea, when you do a wavefront optimized treatment, you just ablate 92, but on a topo-guided treatment, you're ablating 102 because you're ablating 92 of your sphere and cylinder and another 10 microns for the higher order aberrations. So then the outcome is more or less perfect because your corneal aberrations are also treated in your wavefront, topo-guided treatments. And the residual cylinder, though it is just 0.25, it is predominantly astigmatism, and your coma and other aberrations are taken care of. And based on this concept, your wavefront topo-guided treatments and the wavefront guided treatments are working, wherein they neutralize the aberrations of the cornea in addition to the sphere and the cylinder. And when we compared in a study between wavefront optimized and the topo-guided ablation treatments in eyes with regular topographies, if you look at that, we had a group which was matching preoperatively between the two groups of wavefront optimized and topo-guided, and they had similar cylinders and similar mean refractive spherical equivalents and visions. And postoperatively, though the number of patients who are within plus or minus 0.5 is similar between the two groups, if you look at the actual number of patients who gained lines better than their uncorrected vision pre-op, where like 97% of patients gained a better uncorrected vision than they had their preoperative best corrected visions. And that was better in the TCAT or the topo-guided groups because the amount of aberrations in the cornea is also treated better than in your wavefront optimized profile. And if you look at the aberration analysis of these patients, you would be able to see that compared to the pre and the post, the amount of coma that is there on the cornea is minimal, and the induction of coma is minimal in your topo-guided treatment platforms. So this is in normal corneas wherein your astigmatism is regular and your the difference between the two hemimeridians superiorly and inferiorly and the difference across the different zones of the cornea is normal and the cornea is regular, and the amount of cylinder that you refract on the patient and the amount of astigmatism he has on your topography are similar. So this is an era which was like say 10 years ago when people started doing Contura and other kinds of topo-guided treatments, and they had better outcomes with the topo-guided patients profiles on normal patients. So when you look at the other scenario, like which I said initially, if they all match together, the planning is simple and the outcomes are predictable, and your outcomes are slightly better as far as the aberration profile is concerned, and the number of patients attaining an uncorrected vision over their preoperative corrected vision is slightly better in the topo-guided platforms. So this is not the topic of discussion today, but if you look at, say, on this scenario wherein your refraction on is say 0.5 diopter cylinder and on what you measure on your topography is 1.5, and the axis is also different by 19 degrees. And these are situations where your planning becomes controversial, and which cylinder to treat, what axis to treat, and these can become an issue. And for these, there were different generations of algorithms and different generations of planning and solutions are provided. The first one of it came from John Kanellopoulos, wherein what they did was if the difference was say a diopter between the two, the advice was to treat the topographic cylinder and the axis, and whatever you add on the cylinder over the patient's refraction, you subtract half of it so that the spherical equivalent remains the same. And so that if you, instead of treating a minus 0.5, you treat a minus 1.5 at the axis that your topographer tells you. And the difference of half a diopter is subtracted from the sphere so that you maintain the spherical equivalent. But again, the outcomes were controversial. The outcomes are inconsistent with a lot of patients going on to have a hyperopic shift. And there are not a lot of people doing this specific TMR adjustment on these corneas with differences. And so basically, there are newer systems coming up, but we need to understand better as to what are the sources of the topographic and the refractive cylinders. So we'll touch upon why these things differ and what are the sources for the differences. and then see how if we can alter the way we treat these patients. So for understanding these, we had a few devices which helped us in understanding. So the Galili is a Scheimpflug topographer, but you can substitute it with any other Scheimpflug topographer or a topographer just to understand what component of your cylinder is astigmatism and what component is of the other higher order aberrations. And an eye trace is also important to understand how the lens affects the actual cylinder and the so the internal aberrations, how they affect the corneal aberrations and the total eye aberrations. So, and Osiris T was another device which we use, which is similar to eye trace, but it can measure the aberrations of the eye dynamically as the patient accommodates. So, but we are not going to touch upon that because a lot of us haven't used Osiris T here. So we'll predominantly stick to Galili and eye trace. And so if you look at the topographic cylinder, which we initially started off discussing with, as to say, a patient has a 2 diopters of cylinder, 1 diopter of cylinder as shown on the topography image. All of that is not purely astigmatism, as in second order astigmatism. Like predominantly they could be second order in most of the patients, and in a good amount of patients it could be also having other components of, say, aberrations. So if you have a 2 diopter of cylinder on which is shown on your topographer, the actual aberration, actual astigmatism may be just say 1.5 to 1.6 in in patients, and there could be like say another 0.3 or 0.4 diopters wrongly measured by your topographer as cylinder, because there is no way to actually specifically show you what diopters of coma is there in your cornea, and because it's a large aberration profile, and finding out which is contributing exactly to what is not possible with the topographer. So what they do is, like, your Galili will be able to show you as to what percentage of your cornea has astigmatism being contributed by the cylinder, and what else of the aberrations are contributing to the remaining part of the cylinder. And this can be provided by your Galili. It can also be derived from the other topographers with some softwares. And if you look at the examples of how to understand these, so if you look at this cornea, which is regular and has a cylinder of say 2 diopters, and there is no differences between the hemimeridian superiorly inferiorly, and between the zones they look symmetrical, and there is no rapid change in powers between the zones. And if you look at this patient on Galili, he has say 90 to 95% of his measured astigmatism as a proper second order astigmatism, and there is a very minimal component of other say the higher order astigmatisms and coma. And if you look at this patient, other patient which we showed you, this patient's profile would have a significant part, says just 40% of it as astigmatism, and another 50% is coma, 10% is trefoil. So whatever you see on your topographer as astigmatism is not entirely the astigmatism. It has a component of coma and other aberrations. These are being, the last few years have had a few papers which show, as in LIRA protocol and other protocols, where they have understood how, as the higher order aberrations in the cornea increase, how the difference between the refractive and the topographic cylinders change. So, and when you look at, say, for example, this patient with a refraction cylinder of 1.75 and a topographic cylinder of 2.75, and the difference, if you look at how these aberrations could contribute, if the astigmatism is say 1 point, the actual second order astigmatism is only 1.5, and the patient could have a 0.6 diopter of coma based on your analysis of aberrations, and could be a 0.4 diopters of trefoil, and so all of these together would contribute to what the topographer measures as your astigmatism. So out of these, say the total 2.5, the patient will actually accept on refraction only 1.5 diopters of cylinder, because that is what is the actual astigmatism or the second order astigmatism which is contributing to the cylinder. The remaining aberrations are not accepted by the patient on his glasses, and he would need either a hard contact lens or a scleral lens for the other aberrations to be neutralized. So this is important to understand. So when you look at normally, so we don't expect the lens to do a lot, but what the lens can do is it can also alter the amount of astigmatism that the patient shows on refraction. So if you look at, we studied these profiles inferiorly, what we are showing here as, the component of astigmatism contributed by the actual astigmatism and those contributed by the coma. These influence the amount of cylinder that the patient has on the cornea. And along with that, the lenticular changes or the lens that can induce or compensate cylinders, and these together give you the final acceptance of the patient on refraction. And to show you an example, so this was a patient with a slightly decentered ablation who came to us for a recentration and for better vision because they had a significant glare. And the refraction just showed a 0.25 diopter sphere and a 0.5 diopter cylinder. And if you look at what this patient had on topo guided treatment platform, so he had a 0.5 diopter cylinder on refraction, but he had actually measured a 1.5 diopter cylinder on his topographer. And so there is a 1 diopter of difference between the two. So if you look at the same understanding of how these things could differ, if we apply them to see what is different, his corneal wavefront aberration profile showed that his astigmatism was only 0.15 and his coma was 0.8 diopters. Out of the 1.5 which was actually being measured on the topographer, his actual astigmatism was only 0.15 and his coma was 0.8. So which means that 55% of whatever you measured on his topographer is not actually his astigmatism. And additionally, when you look at, and as I said, this patient will be able to accept only the astigmatism and not the coma component of what it shows as astigmatism. And that is the reason why his refractive cylinder is much lesser than what is shown on the topographer as the cylinder. And the other component, as I said, the lens, I'm just zooming in the important portions of this. So if you look at the corneal aberration profile inferiorly here, the lower part, you'll be able to see that the corneal aberration definitely the cornea has significant coma. But when you look at what the lens does internally is that these are like negative and these are positive. So the lens is entirely compensating for what the cornea is showing. And finally, whatever is there in the total whole eye is a much lesser component of what the actual cornea has. So if you look at this, so the lens can be seen compensating for the corneal coma, as in the internal aberrations are seen compensating. And that is also another part of the reason why whatever is there on this topographer being measured as cylinder is not accepted by the patient on his refraction. So this is something that happens as in when the coma changes as well as the lens changes are together contributing to a decreased refractive acceptance of the patient. So we discussed that, out of whatever the patient had, predominantly what he had on the astigmatism, what was contributing to his astigmatism was coma. So which is why a part of his topographic cylinder he was not accepting, and the cylinder and the lens was also compensating for the coma. And this is an animation to understand what can happen in accommodation and how the lens can alter the appearance of the corneal cylinder. And that is also decreasing the amount of refraction the cylinder that the patient can accept. And so this is just one image from the Osiris T device, wherein if you look at, so this is the blue line is tracking the lens accommodation, which is a dynamic accommodation. The red line is a stimulus. So the red line is say the +3 diopters of accommodative stimulus, and the blue line shows how much the lens actually accommodates. So if you look at this patient, the lens actually accommodates much more than what is the accommodative stimulus. So which means that the lens is under a constant stress, and the patient can have significant asthenopia because of this. So this can also be seen on a eye trace as significantly increased defocus on the internal aberrations, whereas here we can quantify it as a component of how much of internal accommodation happens in response to a stimulus. So normally if the stimulus is around 3 diopters, the accommodation is only around 2.5 to 2.75 diopters. But if the accommodation is much more than what is the stimulus, then the lens is actually acting more than it is required, and that could be because of and that could be partly compensating the cylinder that the patient has on his topography. So we discussed a few concepts as to how the corneal aberrations can mask as astigmatism and how the lens can decrease the amount of astigmatism that is seen on the topography. And let's apply this to an example and see how we can apply it. So this is another patient who came in with a T-centered ablation, and if you look at this patient had significant coma, and his vision was around 20/30, but he had a lot of glare in the evening, and he wanted to have a resurfacing of his surface. So this patient had just a 0.5 diopter cylinder on his refraction, and when we looked at his topo-guided treatment platform, his actual cylinder was minus 1.3, which was like say 0.8 diopters more than what he was actually accepting on refraction. So when we looked at his aberration profile on his cornea, we understood that these numbers are not, I'm not I don't want you to specifically look at these numbers and count them and subtract them. So it is to explain how things work in this picture. So his astigmatism was only 0.45, whereas his coma was 0.76, derived from the pie charts on Galilei. And so this was actually the majority of what was showing on his topographer as the astigmatism, which was minus 1.3, was contributed to the coma. And what was his actual astigmatism on the cylinder was only 0.45. And so out of 1.3, 0.76 was actually coma. So the actual cylinder was only 0.45. And when you look at what his acceptance was, which was 0.5. So which explained, which went in sync with the understanding that we had that he'll be able to accept the cylinder and not the coma. And when we checked his internal aberrations in his eye trace as well, though there was a lens compensation which was also happening, but it was not as significant as we saw in the other case. So still predominantly what the total aberrations the eye showed were the corneal aberrations, and they were compensated partly by the lens. But the corneal coma was the most important factor influencing the vision in this patient and the astigmatism. So instead of treating, and when you look at the topolizer, when we plan for this patient for this corneal cylinder, this modified refraction is something called a zero rule. So even when you don't treat him for any of his sphere or cylinder, when we just apply a zero rule, still we have a part of, a good amount of ablation that is happening on the cornea just to treat the surface. And this is taking care of the coma and the trefoil that the patient has. And so applying that concept, so what it basically means is, this means out of the 1.3 cylinder that he's showing on topographer, 0.8 is already being treated even when we don't use any sphere or cylinder, input any sphere or cylinder into the treatment. So what is left is just a 0.5. So what we did for him was treat only the 0.5 that the patient was accepting, and did a topo guided treatment. So the topo guided treatment essentially took care of the rest of the aberrations, and the 0.5 of the cylinder was actually his original astigmatism. So, and at the end, his outcome was, when you look at his outcome, this is post-op day 1. So this was, on the left is a pre-operative, and this is a post-operative day 1 picture. Sorry, not day 1. So this is 2 weeks after the procedure. So if you look at this image, the topography is stabilized, and the patient's final refraction was, though he had a plus 0.25 hyperopic shift, he was 20/20 vision. And imagine in this scenario, if we had treated, instead of just treating a minus 0.5, if we had treated the entire minus 1.3, which was showing on his topographer, he would have been overcorrected for the cylinder, because 0.8 of this is already being treated by means of a zero correction, just with his aberrations being treated. A 0.8 is being taken care. So we had to decrease the amount of coma that we need to treat, and just do a zero rule plus add on just what is the remaining cylinder, and treat the patient accordingly. But this is not possible in each and every scenario where you can calculate the coma, cylinder, and everything, and plan a treatment like that. So what we devised was, based on these 3 things, based on the Zernike analysis of the cornea, based on the zero rule, which is amount of ablation that happens for a zero refraction, and the state of the lens in the eye, we devised a 3Z nomogram, which was, say, after the John Kanellopoulos nomogram. The next one which came in was the Forsidis rule, which had a significant component of posterior corneal astigmatism. So we also analyzed that component in our study. So when you look at the 3Z nomogram, what we basically did was this retrospective data of treating a lot of patients like this, along with their outcomes, and creating an algorithm and including AI, and we tested the algorithm. And additionally, what we did was, when we validated the algorithm, and we turned it into an app called the 3Z app. And this is an app which is a novel software for treatment of myopic LASIK in primary topo guided patients. So even you can use it for normal eyes and also for irregular corneas. When you look at, so basically what we did was, we divided patients into 3 groups. So the top group was the one where the difference between the 2 was minimal. So the top group was one where the difference between the three groups, difference between the refractive and the measured cylinder was less than 0.5. And so we basically had three groups. So in one group, which is a treatment group 1, wherein all the patients had, as we see here, what is there on refraction and what is measured on his cornea on the topographer is similar. So that means the amount of amount of high order aberrations that is there on the cornea is minimal. So they were group 1 patients, and group 2 were those who had their measured cylinder on the topographer much more than what they were what the patient was accepting, which is more than a difference of 0.5. And group 3 were patients where the amount of measured cylinder was less than what the patients are accepting, which were basically lens induced. So based on the retrospective data with AI, what we devised the software was you just have to feed in the manifest refraction and then the topographic refraction of the patient, and then what is the optic zone that you're going to treat, and the ablation from the zero rule. So any topographer, when you just feed in a zero ablation on a topo guided platform, it will show you the amount of ablation that it is going to do, and with that you can enter these values here, and what it will finally show you is based on this algorithm, the software will tell you what exactly you need to treat. And if you look at this example, in this patient, the cylinder that is measured on refraction and that which is measured on your topographer is similar, and the axis is also similar. So, and even the ablation from the zero rule is very minimal. So this patient did not have a significant higher order aberration. So the software will tell you to use whatever is being accepted the patient on manifest refraction. You can go ahead and treat that with the same axis. And this is for group 1 patients. So when you look at group 2, wherein I said the topolizer or the topographic refraction is much higher than or more than 0.5 diopters higher than what the patient is accepting. If you look at these patients, they have a higher zero rule ablation, that is, they have higher order aberrations on the cornea. And in these patients, it will show you a modified refraction that you need to treat with the axis. And in group 3 patients where it was a lens-induced cylinder, the plan was to, their corneal aberrations are not significant, but the lens was acting more. So these patients would usually require a course of, say, a cycloplegic and, say, nightly atropine for a few days. And you can go ahead with the final wavefront optimized treatment for these patients. And if you look at this table of, say, group 1 and 2 and 3 patients, and if you look at the posterior corneal astigmatism that is there on pentagam, all these 3 groups had a similar posterior corneal astigmatism, which was there, and even the axis of it was similar, and which was matching with the axis of the anterior corneal astigmatism. So considering posterior corneal astigmatism as a factor into like how the Forsidis study does, was not making a difference in the outcome that we had. So our nomogram does not involve the PCA as an important factor. And if you look at the outcomes, this is for all 3 groups combined. And the amount of cylinder that we treated was around 2 diopters more than done in any other study. So the number of patients who are less than 0.5 diopters, within 0.5 diopters of refractive astigmatism target are just 78%. Whereas if you compare with the Forsidis analytical system of Mark Lobanov, you have close to 88% of patients who have within 0.5 diopters of cylinder. But it is not just the amount of cylinder as we discussed initially. The amount of cylinder that is left could be partly coma, could be partly other aberrations. And what you need to look at is how the lens is holding on. So if you look at this slide, this is a slide of, it's a slightly busy slide, but what it basically shows you is based on eye trace. And when we do the eye trace for distance, intermediate and near in these patients, and then derive the spare cylinder on each of these distances, how these change with accommodation. So if you look at group 1 patients who are normal, the amount of cylinder that actually changes with accommodation is just 0.1 as the patient accommodates. And this is maintained across the 3 groups. So group 3 and group 2 were patients who had some lens-induced aberrations, lens-induced changes, but on treating them with the software, with the algorithm, the amount of actual astigmatism that they changed on accommodation was significantly lesser. So these lenses were more at rest on accommodation compared to the patients who were accommodating much more preoperatively. So this kind of a comparison we do not have between other say studies as the Forsidis or the TMR or the other systems, because this is a new way to study the accommodation, how the cylinder changes with accommodation, and how the lens is at whether it is at rest or not. So we need more studies, and we need more beta testing and multicentric studies to find out more number of patients, more number of possibilities, and have a component of machine learning to better the software and the understanding. And this when we compare it with different other options of how the lens works post surgery, because it is just not the amount of cylinder that is left, it is the amount of aberrations which is left and how the lens is acting in response to these irregular corneas, and which is what makes a significant difference in the outcome of these patients. So I was fast in this presentation, and if there were any queries, I'm sure there would be. Even if they are later, I'll be happy to answer, and I'm happy to take questions.
All right, thanks, Atish. That was a very nice presentation on how we should be looking at cylinder in a different way and incorporating various elements of aberrations to explain what we're seeing. So what would be your suggestion now in terms of communicating from one refractive surgeon to another as to how we should talk about cylinder? Like, should we break it down into its various aberrometric profiles? What do you suggest? Because it's just saying someone's got two diopters of cylinder at this axis is seemingly overly simplistic. So how would you propose we communicate these ideas to each other?
So when we look at the routinely looked at normal cornea, say as in 80 to 85% of patients would have, everybody has higher order aberrations in their cornea. It is not that anybody has a completely zero higher order aberration. Everybody has them. But what component of them is actually affecting the vision and what component is not is important. So for a patient with an unaided vision of 20/20 and a best corrected vision of 20/20, and whose cornea look completely regular, as in when the hemimeridional difference is less than 1 diopter between superior and inferior, and the zonal variation is less than 1 on your EKR. So these patients are, as they can be called as regular normal corneas. So we do not have to break them up into their components, because whether you treat them on your wavefront optimized profiles or on topo-gated profiles, your outcomes are going to be similar. So it is that remaining 10 to 15% of patients who are those with complex issues, both with the lens and with the cornea. It is in these patients that it makes a difference. So apart from just looking at what the cylinder shows, and what a lot of refractive surgeons, when they speak to us, they say is that this patient just had a 1 diopter cylinder, so we took him up for a wavefront optimized treatment and his outcome was not good. Whereas this patient had a 5 diopter cylinder, so he required a topo-gated treatment. So it is not the amount of cylinder that is important, it is what the cylinder comprises of is important. So even if you have a 5 diopter cylinder and it is perfectly regular, there is no significant higher aberration, even on doing a wavefront optimized treatment with a good pupil recognition and cyclotorsion compensation will give him a very good outcome. Whereas just with the 1 diopter, seemingly looking 1 diopter cylinder, if that is comprised of higher order aberrations, even if you treat them without understanding on a topo-gated platform what has to be done, how much has to be treated, the outcomes are going to be different. So it is more important, rather than just looking at the cylinder, the refractive surgeons have to have an idea of what level of irregularity they are dealing with as far as the cornea is concerned, and to what level is the lens compensating. So everybody who treats complex corneas need to have a good topographer with an eye trace. So which are two important devices for them to understand the refraction of the patient as a whole, rather than just looking at what is shown as K1 and K2.
Okay, and so it seems like other refractive surgeons that you're suggesting that, yes, in complex corneas, we should be looking at a really good manifest refraction, but also correlating that with a really good topographic assessment. And then depending on whether there's a big difference between it, and that's when you clue in as to whether the lens-induced elements or other aberrations involved. We have a question here. It says, fantastic talk, thank you. When trying to be this precise in treating only 3 to 4 microns of higher order aberration, what role do you feel microkeratome flaps or meniscus flaps versus femtosecond or more planar flap makes?
Yes, so all of these, the latest studies in the last few years, at least 7 to 8 years on these advanced ablation profiles have all been done on the femto-based systems because of better predictability of flap depth, better smooth margins of the depth. And that is one reason why we cannot directly compare it with the microkeratome flap, because microkeratome more, even with the healing, even with the depth of estimated depth, there could be variation. So it is not possible directly to compare head on, but I would say if on a person's hands who is well trained in microkeratome and he has been using that since a long time, understanding the cornea and applying the principles would still give a decent outcome as with the femtosecond compared to not understanding and doing on a very high end excimer or the femtosecond system.
Okay. And how do you counsel patients having large zero ablation profiles, say more than 12 microns with a 6.0 optical zone, knowing that they are more likely to need enhancement?
Yeah, so it is. So there are two ways we can approach these patients. So one is if we have a nomogram which is working for them, as in we can do a single step treatment where instead of doing just a zero rule correction and then looking at what is their residual refraction after this procedure and treating that, or you could directly do a one step wherein you understand how much of the zero rule ablation is contributing to the cylinder correction and then correcting the residual cylinder in the same setting as we discussed, so that the outcomes are better. But in spite of all of that, the one common thing that we tell for all of these patients who undergo complex cornea correction is that they could need a secondary procedure to alter the amount of cylinder or sphere that they need to be treated in. And the process of healing is going to take time, at least it's going to be 12 to 20 weeks, wherein the cornea will remodel and the aberration profile will settle down. And until then, the outcomes are not going to be as expected. And even after that, they may still need a secondary correction, because these are not like a proper single sphere and cylinder with a regular cornea. And treating these corneas the outcome could be slightly different in each and every eye. And we may have to counsel the patient to be ready for a secondary procedure at times. But most of the times when we do it with the right understanding of what the patient is going through, more than 70% of these patients do not require a secondary procedure.
And then this app, this 3Z app, is it available or is it in research stages, or how can we access this?
Yeah, so it is not available openly to everybody. It can be used in specific centers on the basis that they will be using it for research purposes and sharing the outcome data with them. And so that it will be helping to build the machine learning aspect of the study. And so it can be used in any of these topo-guided platforms, provided they have these devices like a good topographer, a good abrometer, so that they can use these facilities.
So it can be used on any platform, any topo-guided platform?
Yes.
Okay. Another question on the Topalizer, we normally average several topos, sometimes 3 to 5. With the Zeiss platform, we are planning topo treatments on a single topo. Do you think this is more dangerous than averaging?
Yeah, so averaging definitely helps in a lot of patients, because as far as topo-guided treatments are concerned, when we do a scan on a Topalizer, we realize how different it can be every time we do a scan, because just with the surface changes on the eye, just with the amount of lid exposure, amount of lighting, amount of the pupil changes, all of these can actually alter the Topalizer images. And it is definitely advisable to do a few, at least 5 images as far as Topalizer is concerned. So when we don't do an averaging as in the Zeiss systems, it can, we do not have a head-on comparison between the Zeiss MEL90 versus the EX500 as to how the outcomes of topo-guided treatments are in especially complex corneas. Because as far as regular corneas are concerned, a single good image should be definitely useful in most cases, should be sufficient. But in irregular corneas, you definitely need a really good amount of images to average them, so that the outcomes are more consistent and non-varying.
Okay, another question. Would you ever treat a topo-guided treatment without cyclorotation lock?
No, never. Topo-guided treatment without a cyclorotation is not an option at all.
Okay. And so for patients who, for refractive surgeons who don't have a MEL or an Alcon system or another topo guide system, say they've got a wavefront guided system, what's your suggestions for them in terms of how to manage these cylinder patients, complex cylinder patients?
Yeah, so unlike in these topo-guided systems where we exactly know what it is doing, how much of abrasions it is treating, the wavefront guided system is, you cannot even alter the actual cylinder axis, and a lot of what says the iDesign shows or the other wavefront guided systems show, like your Teneo or the Bosch and Lomb systems, wherein it is actually difficult to encode what the machine is doing because it is the algorithm and the proprietary properties are not disclosed by the companies. So in those cases, the best would be to treat the patient for a zero refraction, zero spear, zero cylinder, and see what the patient's outcome is. And then the patient would essentially not then have an aspheric planar refraction as in just a spear and a cylinder. And then you can opt to treat the spear and the cylinder, which is one of the best ways. And the outcomes are actually good because I know a few refractive surgeons with the wavefront guided systems who do that. So they just do a surface treatment for a zero ablation, and then they wait for 3 months, and then they treat the spear and the cylinder. In that case, the cylinder becomes very regular because you have treated the high order aberrations with the wavefront guided treatment, and then your secondary treatment can help the patient's cornea, go on to emmetropia.
Okay, great. All right. So, any other questions from the audience? I think there's no question on the floor. Another question. Let's say you have a contour. Your contour treatment is 65 microns in a keratoconus case. Do you know of a way to treat this partially on the EX500 system? Sometimes this ablation depth is simply too much tissue removed, but without it, you can't treat the coma.
Yeah, so at present in the EX500 system, there is no way you can partially treat the high order aberrations because it either treats all or none. And but if you look at the newer other examer systems, as in the Amaris 1050 or 850, these systems have a specific component of an option to reduce the volume of tissue ablated, wherein it plays around with the aberrations, because if you're looking at, say, the 6 or 7 orders of aberrations, you are looking at close to 28 or 32, 36 aberrations, and you do not know which are the actual aberrations and how they're interacting to actually give the patient the ideal vision. So these systems will be able to, once, instead of you manually removing, say, don't treat trefoil, don't treat spherical aberration, don't treat quadrifoil, there is an option wherein the device knows by itself, if you choose for an option of reduced volume treatment, it decreases the amount of aberrations that it treats in a specific pattern, so that the overall point spread function is better than what can be, what we can manually, think of by ourselves. So those options are there in the newer systems, but the EX500, even if on a zero rule, if it treats more than 65 or 50 microns, then that patient is not a great candidate for a primary topo-guided correction of his surface. In those cases, you would usually require, that means that the patient's cone is very peripheral, an intact or a treatment in a way that the cone is more pushed towards the center, and then you treat predominantly a spherical aberration component rather than a very high component of vertical coma can help in decreasing the amount of aberration for a zero rule. And that is what we essentially do in patients with very high coma and a decentered cone with an advanced keratoconus. Do an intact and then wait for a few weeks and then repeat a topography and then plan a topolizer for a zero ablation. Then you will get a better outcome.
Okay, and the comment here is a MEL 80 and 90, and CRS Master can do this also. So that's a comment from Dr. Lewis. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm yet to explore the MEL 90 topo-guided treatment and what it offers. So it will be really interesting to know and compare it with the other devices.
Awesome. Okay. Well, again, Latish, thanks so much for educating us. I think we end up, we feel like we have more in our brains than we started off with, but I know you put a lot of information there. We've got to figure out how that, I think part of our job is to figure out how new information can be applied directly to our patients going forward. So we look forward to working with you. And of course, any people who in the audience that have questions, feel free to contact Latish. Thanks again, Latish, for your time and putting your efforts in putting this presentation together. Very informative.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baig.
Okay, have a great night, everybody.